here at the Independence Reformed Bible Church, we do allow for questions following the sermon. We certainly didn't get into Revelation nearly as much as we'd like. We do reserve the right to study Revelation in the sermon series in the future, of course. In the meantime, who has a question about what we talked about here this morning? Yes.
Pastor, as we look at and consider who is at fault and who is to blame for piercing Christ, is there a distinction to be made between the blame laid to the whole Jewish people and the Jewish leadership? It seems that Peter was talking to the whole of the Jews, and Stephen was more specifically speaking before the Jewish leadership. Is there a distinction to be made? Because I know there are some that teach that very thing.
Yeah. And certainly the John passage sort of maybe looks like that because it was the Jewish leadership that actually plotted. I actually considered that question when I was studying this. I think it's hard to get away from the fact that as far as being held responsible, see, this is the thing about it. You have the people who actually plotted. I mean, when they were plotting to kill Jesus, every Jewish person was not in that discussion. I mean, there's just no way. But apparently they supported it based on what I see Peter and certainly Stephen saying. They were in support of this. Especially I say that because of what Peter says because the beginning of Acts 2, it talks about all the people that were there. The Jews, it says, from all over the place. And Peter says, you are, he points the finger right at them. So it seems to me that the most clear reading of it is all the Jewish people, all of them were held responsible for this. Especially when we see that Christ had no friends. And this intrigues me. And I am not able to put this together. We know that Jesus, he probably healed hundreds of people, maybe even thousands. There are passages in the New Testament where it says that his fame spread throughout, and people were coming and getting healed, which is what would happen, right? I would. I mean, if I knew anybody that I cared about, if I heard Christ, if I knew someone who had, I think of my nephew who died of leukemia. If Christ could be in St. Louis or San Francisco, well, he wouldn't be in San Francisco. Well, he would, actually. San Francisco wouldn't be the same. But, if he was in Madrid, Spain, and my nephew had leukemia, I would find out, I'd be there. And my question I still have not figured out yet is those people that were screaming and yelling at Christ, and we know that the gospel writers say that it was the chief priests and the scribes that stirred up the people. And see, that's part of your question here. It says it stirred them up. But they still were involved. And I have to believe that there were people attacking Jesus Christ on that cross, some of whom had been healed by him. I have to believe that. He just healed too many people for none of them to be there. So I believe, to answer your question, as I understand it, Peter, Stephen, and Christ actually himself held the entire Jewish people responsible for his death. Great question. It's always a good question when I've thought about it before. Those are the good questions. Who else has a question? Question over there.
So, practically, application-wise, a couple things you mentioned this morning. I was wondering if there's other things, but I think you alluded to it as opposed to saying it. But having children and raising a family for the next generation is definitely one thing that, as a result of this, we should be doing. What else practically does that look like? I mean, you gave an example at the beginning about a man who, based on different thinking, went out and preached the gospel on the street. Shouldn't we be doing that as well?
So that's not so bad.
Right. So what else does it look like?
Yeah. Certainly, Just to answer that briefly, certainly preaching the gospel on the street, absolutely. As we've said so many times before, we still have the opportunity to preach on the street, right? We pretty much don't get thrown in jail for the most part. Some do, and some have. But let's face it, science is pretty much closed to us, pretty much. And I just read an article last night. Science is now being closed not only to us, but it's being closed to those who call them deniers, the whole global warming thing. These are people who are not even Christians, and they're starting to shut them out, too. That's been, well, not starting. They've been doing that for quite a while. Academia. I'll just say it. This is a hard thing to say, but in academia, we're shut out. Despite the fact that so many people tell me, hey, Joel, my school is different, my public school is different, I have Christian teachers. And I have to say, no, you don't have Christian teachers. Hard to say, because when they're teaching your son or daughter, they're not presenting a Christian worldview here. They have to present the secular worldview. That's part of it. So not only that, but if we get out on the street, my friends, we still can be in public places for the most part, and we can preach, and we can sing, and we can pray. Not in academia, not in media, not in entertainment, and not in science. But the street's still available to us, and we should be out there a lot more than what we are. No question about it. There's another thing that I would absolutely say is the ministry of the gospel of Jesus Christ in front of the clinics where they're killing our neighbor. That is a big thing. They're killing our neighbors, my friends, in our streets. And you know from 2 Kings 24:4 that God would not pardon the shedding of all that innocent blood. So that's another thing. I would say this as well. Let me talk to you, the homeschoolers here for a second. Those who teach your children at home. It's not enough to be a homeschooler. It's not enough. Because what are you teaching in your home? See, what we need to do is we need to teach that Christ is the fountainhead of all wisdom and all knowledge all the time, even in our home school. And we can never ever miss that connection, my friends. Because if we miss that connection, we will be raising double-minded children. Think about it. A double-minded man, James says, is unstable in all his ways. And if we miss the connection between Christ and all wisdom and knowledge, as we see in Colossians, and as we see in Proverbs, right? What is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge according to Proverbs? It is the fear of the Lord. So if we must teach that, and if we don't teach that, we will be guaranteeing failure for the next generation. So it's not just that we teach in a certain context. Homeschool, great. It's what we teach, what every one of us teach in our own homes. We're all responsible for it. I'm responsible for it. We taught our children. I am responsible for what our children learned in our home. But not only that, businesses. Why not? Why not start businesses and hire other people? Why not support other people who are starting businesses, even with your money and your time and your labor? Along those lines, Paul talked about, let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands. I do believe throughout the scriptures, working with the hands is seen as a very good thing. Are we teaching the next generation to work with their hands? I did a terrible job with that in my own family. I destroyed things with my hands. I tried to fix things, and by the time I was done, you had to call somebody who could work with their hands to fix it. That happened on more than one occasion. Fact of the matter is, though, whether or not I'm any good at working with my hands is meaningless. The Bible says working with your hands is such a good thing to be able to learn how to do. And I know I'm kind of waxing long on this, but I just want to say this as well. How do we become net givers versus net takers? How do we become a person who actually gives to our neighbor versus a person who just draws all the resources of our neighbor and gives nothing? It has to do with this right here. Because when it says, let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor working with his hands, you see what's happening? You're taking a person who's taking the resources of his neighbor, right, stealing, and now working with his hands to give to his neighbor. This must be throughout our entire teaching process with the next generation. That you are going to be a net giver. You are going to leave the world better than when you found it, which you can do. Those are just some of the things that would definitely be worth a sermon series as well. Yes? Yeah.
So if that happens, then you kind of alluded that we've lost in the science, we've lost in politics, we've lost in these other things. Well, if that's true, if we are concerned about the next generation, won't we regain entertainment and politics and business and everything else?
Man after my own heart. Yes, I do believe that. I do believe that one day politics, science, entertainment, media will be under the domination of those who love Christ. That's part of the process of Christ putting all enemies under his feet. Let's work for it. Let's have a 1,000-year vision here, 2,000-year vision. Thanks. I want to quit after that comment, Sarah. I don't want to quit. Yes, we have a right here.
It's more of a technical question. When you read the passage about coming on clouds, coming on the clouds,
Right.
is there any difference there? I mean, we just got done with bibliology and
Right.
translations and et cetera.
Yeah.
Just a question about that.
Yeah.
Do you see any difference?
Yeah. Well, I see the difference in this sense. When you talk about coming with clouds and talking about coming with the clouds, I think what he's talking about there is the clouds that we were talking about in the past. Those particular clouds. He's referencing those. That's what I think is happening there. But you're right. Every word is important. But he's referencing a particular time. So, yeah. Who else has a question? Yes, we have. She's afraid it's a dumb question.
I'm really going to expose my
Beth
stupidity
is afraid
here.
of a dumb question. Trust me, I'm so much more afraid of a dumb answer.
Why is it important that we understand exactly who's being held responsible here? Because,
No.
I mean, I've heard that, I'm responsible. If I was there, I'd have been screaming, crucify him.
Right, that's what we've heard all the time. That's
So
right.
I'm just kind of curious what
Right.
you're thinking there.
Because the book of Revelation either has a contemporary application or it has a futuristic application. And if those who pierce him is a contemporary application for them right there, and that's the theme of Revelation, then it's a pretty easy step to make that Revelation has a contemporary application throughout the entire book.
Okay.
But I want to thank you for your kind attention this morning. This has been a challenging series. We're finished with it. We're doing we're having a fellowship dinner today. I certainly want to be available for anyone who wants to ask me a private question or talk about this privately. I certainly want to be available to you throughout the morning.